Joseph because Joseph had the coat of many colors. Joseph was the dreamer in the Bible. He was the one that was brought up, and he was a late bloomer. He was the last one. He was the baby of the family. And he got razzed by all his older brothers because Dad took extra time with him, extra care with him. He was spoiled. He was spoiled. The baby always gets spoiled. He gets all the time, the attention, and the brothers were jealous of him. And one day he came in. His father had been teaching him math, and, geometry, and all those things that you wouldn't think they'd learn in the Bible. But he did how to, the hillbillies called it cipher, so whatever you want to call it, anyway, the number. But anyway, his father was teaching him all that because he was going to need that later. So he came in and he had a dream. He had this wonderful dream. He said, I was a great big sheaf of wheat in the middle of the field, and all of y'all were sheaves in the field, and y'all bowed down to me and worshiped me. His brother said, we bowed down and worshiped you, the little brother? I don't think that's going to happen. So then he had another dream, and everybody, the sun, the moon, the stars, his father, his mother, and all his brothers worshiped him. And his father rebuked him. He said, your father and your mother bow down and worship you, their baby son? I don't think that's right, Joseph. So anyway, but that was right. And we see that happen later. Because Joseph was a dreamer and an interpreter of dreams. So we find that in his story. So one day, his father asked him, he said, I want you to go down and check on your brothers. They're tending the sheep. And he said, I want you to check on them and be sure everything's good. See if they need anything, if I need to send anything to them. So he's joyful. He said, Lord, he said, Father, my father, Israel, he said, I will go. And joyfully he takes off on his journey. And he goes to the town of Shechem. Well, he gets to Shechem, which is a little town, probably about the size of, Aledo. Maybe he should have went to Weatherford. I don't know. But that's where y'all are, right? Little Park, Weatherford. So Aledo's down here, Weatherford's over here. So somewhere in between. So anyway, he goes to Shechem and they're not there. So he asked somebody, have you seen my brothers tending the sheep? And he said, well, he said, they moved on. He moved on. He said, you might find them as you go down to Doran. So he's on his way to Doran, and the brothers see him coming up, and they meet him. And you know what his brothers did? They were jealous. So you know what they had done? They plotted to kill their younger brother. To kill their younger brother. They were going to kill him because they were jealous. They were out there. Nobody would know what would happen. And so they'd already figured out they'd take his coat of many colors and they'd kill a lamb and they'd put that blood on there and they'd send it back to father and say he died. Well, the oldest brother who came up with this story, he went to do something. And the next youngest brother, he had mercy on Joseph. He said, we're not going to kill him. We can't kill our brother. His blood will be on our hands. We can't do that. So there were some traders that came through on their way to Egypt. And they said, we'll sell him to the traders. And so they decided to do that. So they sold Joseph to traders. And so they had Joseph captive because they had him in a pit. And the pit was like a well, and they said there was no water in it. So I'm thinking that it was a well that had dried up, but they had him in a pit. He couldn't escape, couldn't get out. So when they came by, they asked the traders, said, will you buy Joseph? And they said, yeah. So for 20 pieces of silver, they sold their brother. And so they did go ahead and kill the lamb and put blood on his coat of many colors and sent it to the father. And the father was distraught. He was very upset. He rent all of his clothes, and then he mourned the loss of Joseph for a number of days. So anyway, so Joseph then, had he done anything wrong? He did what his father told him. He went to Shechem. In fact, he went beyond what his father had asked him. He went to the next town too because he didn't want to go home because he didn't want his father to be disappointed because he hadn't found his brother. So he went the extra step. So he did everything that he was supposed to do. But what happened to him? He ends up in a pit. He ends up being sold. He ends up losing his beautiful coat, and he ends up going to Egypt as a slave. Does that sound like that's the right thing to happen to you if you're doing what you're supposed to? Yeah? No. Doesn't sound like, and so, but God blessed him. God was pleased with him because he did what he was supposed to do. And so he was wise and he didn't need discipline, but God was pleased with him. But Joseph was tested and he was preparing the way for the Hebrew people. But did he know that? Shake your head. No. But did he do it anyway? Yes. He trusted God and he obeyed him to do what God had a plan for his life to do. So, God was pleased with him. He was tested. He was wrongfully put in a pit. The brothers plotted to kill him. They took his coat. And then he went to Egypt. When he went to Egypt, he was a slave. He cleaned the floors, whatever the dirty, nasty tasks were, that's what he did. He didn't have a floor machine or mop. It was a brush and a rag, and on his knees, and he scrubbed the floor. Well, he just scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, and they saw how good he did and how well he cleaned all the floors. And one of the masters, Potiphar, you might remember his name, Potiphar said, I want to buy you, Joseph. I want you to come and work at my house. So he did. But he saw how smart Joseph was. So Joseph took care of his house, took care of his finances, and while Joseph was at his house, Potiphar prospered because God blessed Joseph, because Joseph was doing what God wanted him to do, and he did the job well. My grandfather always told me, he said, if you're going to do anything in life, be the very best you can be at whatever you do. It doesn't matter whether it's emptying trash, or working on a garbage truck, or if you're the President of the United States, which I hope that doesn't ever happen with the President of the United States. You want to do the very best that you can do. So he did. And so he was in Potiphar's house. Potiphar was blessing. But you know, Potiphar's wife got jealous of Joseph. Because who was getting all his attention? Her husband's attention. Who was getting all? Joseph was. And so she made a story up about him and told her husband that Joseph did some things that he didn't do. He wasn't even a part of it. That wasn't anything that he would ever do. So they put him in jail. So here he is. He goes sold into slavery. They take his coat. And now he's in jail. Well, you know, he was so good in jail. You know what they did? They made him the head jailer. And so he was in charge of all the people that were in the jail. Their rations, their food, their clothes, you know, coming in, coming out. And so he was in charge. God blessed him again. Even in jail, he was blessed. So when he was in the jail, there were two men that came in from the Pharaoh. Pharaoh's chief butler and his chief baker. And they came in because the Pharaoh was displeased with them. And they were in jail. And after they were in jail, they had a dream. And nobody knew what the dreams meant. So they said, Joseph said, well, God is the person who can tell you what dreams mean. And he said, I will go to God. So they listened to him. And the baker, he said, well, all I know is that there were 3 baskets stacked on top of my head. And in the top basket was lots of meat for the Pharaoh. And he said, and then I awakened from the dream. And then the second one, who was the butler, he said, I saw 3 branches of a vine, and they all bore grapes. And then the grapes were made into wine, and then I saw the Pharaoh's cup, and I filled it full of wine, and I served it to the Pharaoh. Okay? So the first one, the chief butler, he said, what you're talking about, the 3 vines, is 3 days. In 3 days, the Pharaoh is going to call you back to his office as the head butler, and you're going to serve him wine, fresh wine, in his cup. And he said, and your life is going to be restored. So the baker, he got really excited. This was good news. It was a great dream. And Joseph said, I don't have good news for you. He said, why? He said, well, you too, the 3 baskets on your head, those meant 3 days. And then the meat that was on top, that meant that you were going to be eaten by the birds. He said, you're going to be hung and eaten by the birds because of what you did was so bad to the Pharaoh that he's going to have you executed. So that was it. So he told the one that was going to be the Pharaoh's butler, he said, if the Pharaoh has a dream, remember me, remember me, remember me. So 2 more years he stays in jail. 2 more years. Okay, so he loses his coat, he gets put in the ditch, he gets put in service as slave, and now he's in jail, and he's telling dreams and listening to dreams. And so, guess what? 2 years later, you know what happened? The Pharaoh had a dream. And he called his magicians and everybody in and said, interpret this dream for me. Nobody knew what it meant. Nobody knew what it had to do. He said, well, they said, well, we know a man that was in jail, and he interpreted our dreams. And they said, well, go get him. So he was in pretty bad shape in jail. He wasn't, he didn't go down to Walmart and get new clothes or anything like that. So they shaved him. I guess he lost his beard. Anyway, shaved him, and they put on new clothes and cleaned him up. I guess he showered and bathed and went to see the Pharaoh. Well, he went to see the Pharaoh. He said, can you interpret my dream? He said, God is an interpreter of dreams. And he said, share with me your dream. And he said, well, there were 2 dreams. The first dream he said, there were 7 really big, I'm going to say catfish, because we know what catfish are. 7 really big catfish come swimming up on the bank from the river. Great big catfish. And he said, then 7 little scrawny catfish came up. And then they ate the great big catfish, and they were still skinny. Okay. And he said, in the second dream I had, he said, there was the sheaves, and the sheaves, once again, there were 7 sheaves, full and plentiful. And then corn. There were 7 stalks of corn, and the 7 stalks of corn were full and plentiful. And then 7 skinny stalks of corn came and devoured the 7 full corn. And when the skinny ones had eaten the full corn, the skinny ones were still skinny. That sounds like a diet program to me. But anyway, so they were still skinny. And Joseph said, the 2 dreams that you have are one. They're the same dream. But God is letting you know ahead of time what he's fixing to do to Egypt. He's going to let you know. So he's going to let you know that something really severe is going to happen. And he said, so he told you the dream twice. The 7 is 7 years. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, that everybody is going to have more than they can possibly eat or take care of and put back. And then the next 7 years is going to be a drought. And that drought's going to be worse than all the 7 years of feasting put together. They're going to, like you never even knew you had extras. So this is what's going to happen. So he told Joseph that. So and the Pharaoh said, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to prepare for this? He said, Joseph told him, he said, well, you need somebody that can bring stuff into the storehouse and take 1/5 of everything every year and put it in the storehouse. And then you'll have plenty, and then you can sell it back to the people. And the Pharaoh said, you have a job. That's what he told him. Somebody might say, you're hired. So he had a job. So the only person that was hired in Egypt was a poor little boy that obeyed his father, that was put in a pit, and then he was sold into slavery, and he was put into jail, and now he is the assistant to the Pharaoh of all of Egypt. That's how God blessed him. And then it went on in his life to be fruitful and multiply, and he brought all the Hebrew people in, and all the Hebrew people came in to Egypt to get food after the first 7 years. So when the famine came, guess who needed food? You know who needed food? His brothers that sold him into slavery. Their father, Israel, told the brothers, go into Egypt. Now, did they know anything about Joseph in Egypt? That he was a second in charge in Egypt? No. They just knew they were hungry. So they went to get food. What turns out, of course, Joseph had already forgave them, he fed them, and then he met his younger brother, Benjamin. And he had all of them and moved all of them back into Egypt. And this was the start of the Hebrew nation. This is when we had the 12 tribes of Israel. And Israel was the nation, but Israel was also the father of Joseph. So the 12 tribes were created, and this is when the Hebrew nation thrived and multiplied and was what it was to become. All because of the little boy that obeyed his father, was thrown in a pit, sold, became a slave, was in jail, and then was made assistant in Pharaoh, so that God could work his plan in his life to prepare the tribe and the country of the Hebrew nation, Israel, which that nation became the forebearing of Jesus our Savior. And he was of the house of lineage of David. So all that came because of what Joseph did. Joseph was blessed personally. Joseph, it said, got to reunite with his family, his friend, and be Benjamin. It said he lived to be, you might not think this is important, he lived to be 110. He lived to be 110. And it said that his third generation sat on his lap. Do you know what that would mean? Well, I'm raising a great-grandson, so that would be a great-great. So Joseph's great-great-grandson sat on his lap, and he got to enjoy his great-great-grandson before he passed away. Is that not being blessed of God, to be able to live that long and to see your nation, the people you love, taken care of? That's awesome, that because he was willing to trust and obey, because he was willing to trust God and obey God, God was able to bless him and bless a nation and a plan just because he followed what the instructions of his father Israel and did what God had asked him to do. All of us, when we follow him and we walk with the Lord and we trust the Lord, he has a plan for all of us. Maybe little plans, big plans, but they're plans, and they're plans for you. Each one person here has their own plan. And one day we're going to all be able to rejoice in heaven together. We're going to all be there with him, the person who saved us and redeemed us, and that has brought us to life. Is the person that we're going to be able to be with in heaven. I want to sing a song, and I've sung this one before.